Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode I'm sailing out in the Tier VIII premium German battleship known as the Tirpitz, in a Tier VIII Standard Battle on the map Hotspot. The focus of today's gameplay, as I'm joined by my good friend Ben, who's in the sister of this ship, that being the Bismarck, is twofold. Firstly, for me to give my first impressions of the Tirpitz, having picked her up last week as part of the EU summer sale and played roughly 5 games in her to date. And secondly, in terms of specific to this gameplay, seeing the interplay between the key traits of the Tirpitz and the Bismarck, where the Tirpitz gets torpedo tubes, whereas the Bismarck gets the Hydroacoustic Search consumable, and we'll try to use those unique characteristics at a high level in order to benefit one another as the game progresses. Now to start off with, when I look at the Tirpitz and when I first started playing her, the one thing that really came to mind is this concept of aggression, where it be of a maximum top speed of standard of 30.5 knots, or the ability to get the secondary gun range on your 105 and your 150mm secondaries out to a maximum distance of 11.3 kilometers through the appropriate skills, flags, upgrades, etc., which I have here. That means I've gone for a full brawler build. I want to get as close as possible to my foes to inflict maximum possible damage, getting my main guns onto the target, getting my secondaries onto the target, and getting even closer to bring my 6-kilometer torpedo tubes into play, whereby you have a quadruple tube to each side, and that means you can do a lot of damage if you score hits with all 4 torpedoes in a single barrage, being able to hit for a maximum of 13,700 per torpedo. In turn, however, you have to temper this somewhat in knowing that this is not the most manoeuvrable ship, thanks to its size and the fact that it has that rudder shift of 16 seconds and an 850 meter turn circle radius. Getting stuck into the fight can be a little bit awkward if you're ambushed or caught on multiple sides, so you need to pick the right time to go charging in or get close to the foe. And you're going to see this early on in the fact that whilst I'm charging towards the land masses directly ahead of me, I'm wary of the fact it's a huge cluster of land masses, and the lack of manoeuvrability afforded to my ship means that if I get too close this early on, I'm actually going to be compromising my future survivability. As whilst we have a maximum health pool of 69,300, that health pool can be burnt down rather rapidly over time, particularly if the enemy team have got a Kutuzov and they've also got Hotspot, the Tier VIII Pan-Asian destroyer with its deep water torpedoes that can absolutely devastate a battleship if they hit in multiplicity. Now the Kutuzov already opened fire from long distance, and the fact that I'm not seeing them would indicate that the Hotspot is ahead, or a destroyer is ahead I should say, and I'll come on to why I think it's the Hotspot very shortly. So in return I go to open fire on the Kutuzov, providing ample lead, anticipating the travelling at full speed, but in return the enemy player does a very good job here of making me fire and therefore spot myself for them as they go to smoke, in the fact that they actually cut their speed as I fired, so I've overled the target. And in return, now that I'm waiting for the 20-second delay in my concealment returning to normal, if the enemy destroyer is not spotting me, I'm spotting myself for the Kutuzov smokescreen at this point until the concealment returns to norm. And also the fire's gone out. But in return, opening fire into the smoke screen, I'm turning away here towards the eastern side, having seen on the minimap that the Farragut and the Gator have been spotted in the centre and westwards. Effectively means that the Hotspot, if they decide to split themselves from the rest of their team, would have gone to this side of the map. And my suspicions are going to be confirmed very shortly with a whole wave of deep water torpedoes coming charging past the bow of our Nelson. Just in the nick of time, it looks as our Nelson slowed down and I got out of the way. Now in return, this means I have to go on an eastward path, but this isn't too much of a problem, because what one can consider is, when you go down the very eastern side of Hotspot, starting off with the southern spawn, you are taking yourself out of the game for a period of time. But in return, what you give yourself the ability to do is then to try and open up the game down this eastern side. Because think of it, if I go and charge in towards the central land masses, and try to put my position there on the map in terms of taking down destroyers and securing that area for my team, it means that if I wanted to do a 180-degree reversal, it'd be very difficult for me to do what the positioning of the land masses. And the only way out would effectively be reversing, which would take a considerable period of time, alternatively turning 90 degrees and going in towards the centre of the map by proceeding westwards, or turning 90 degrees eastwards and proceeding out towards the edge, taking myself out of the game for a longer period of time than I'd like. Instead, what I'm planning to do here, with Ben coming up gradually in support, is make my way in towards those land masses off to my port side, and then decide where I want to proceed northward to attack the enemy team in an aggressive stance, using this manoeuvre here to get closer to the enemy team as standard, Alternatively, do I want to turn southwards and lure the enemy team into the landmasses so that way I can use the landmasses later on to drop the distance of the engagement and get into that closer range engagement without having to chase the enemy team effectively? I'm going to bring the enemy team to me and Ben. And we can see the enemy Farragut has positioned itself off towards the centre eastern side of the map, contesting the western side of the landmass grouping and looking towards our Nelson in particular. And our Nelson, having moved into the landmasses, is now experiencing the effects of their lack of manoeuvrability compared to a destroyer or a cruiser by the looks of things on the minimap. Now I'm still making my way forward at this point to indicate to the enemy team that I'm looking to pursue up into the northeastern corner, but I'm not going to do so because this is giving the enemy Kutsov in particular all the kiting advantages they want, in the fact they're a light cruiser, they're able to wiggle their aft appropriately and keep distance and use their speed to maintain that distance. So instead, I'll shortly be turning in towards the landmasses off to my port side, recognising the fact that a pursuit up into the northeastern corner will take me out of the game for a longer period of time, or put me in a less effective position. And this really comes into its own in terms of the poor accuracy of your 380mm artillery pieces when you open fire at those longer distances out towards the ship's maximum range of 21.4 kilometres. What of the absolutely horrendous dispersion compared to what could be available on the likes of, say, North Carolina, your American counterpart at Tier VIII. That 276 maximum dispersion in terms of metres really been noted on the Bismarck, and we'll see it time and time again later on. So instead, now turning in towards the landmasses, we can try to cut off the enemy destroyers and the enemy buoys that's pushed in towards the landmasses. Because if we can get them into a closer range engagement, it means they won't be able to hide from us or use open water to shield themselves from our guns, and instead, by closing that distance, we can start to get our torpedoes and our secondaries into play. Now of course, I'm still waiting for Ben to get closer and closer here because he has the Hydroacoustic Search, which will enable me to counter the torpedoes of the destroyers in particular. So for now, as I make my way in, I recognise the fact Ben's not in a position yet to be in this contest. He's still coming up from behind. So what I decide to do is make my way shortly southwards back out of these landmasses, or make it look as though I'm retreating, opening fire on the hip here to try and get a glancing shot on their broadside. But as you're going to see, we timed it a little bit too late. We should have opened fire with only the lead guns and perhaps we would have hit the target more easily. Now in return, we can see that the buoys is pulling back behind the landmasses, so we can't use our torpedoes, they'll be out of range, 6 kilometre range as mentioned earlier, but we do light a fire in the enemy ship with our secondaries. But the important thing for me here is to get across this little open gap of water, because I know the Hudson Yang's most likely going to be looking at me somewhere within the open water space, looking at the Kutsov once again just in case they decide to turn broadside, but they'll turn back towards our ship, point their bow towards us to avoid the incoming fire. And by getting across this gap right now, we're heading towards the Farragut that's located in the smokescreen on the western side of this group of landmasses, because what I want to do is close the distance to the Farragut so that way when their smoke expires, they're no longer hidden, I'll be spotting them for myself and I can help finish them off. And now look on the minimap how Ben's closed the distance as well, and this is very important because now Ben's Hydroacoustic Search consumable becomes very powerful in the fact that if the enemy Hudson Yang wants to torpedo us, or the enemy Kutsov wants to come down and torpedo us with their 8 kilometre torpedoes if I remember correctly, they will need to get past Ben's Hydroacoustic Search to do so. So he's a barrier to the torpedo threat as we rip apart the Farragut for our first kill, cutting them out of their smoke escape. Now retreating south here, we're given the impression that we're pulling further back, and we want to encourage the enemy ships to come forward and get into that brawling range. The idea being here that perhaps we're a little bit scared to lose health early on, having been set on fire again, and having lost my starboard torpedo tubes indefinitely for the rest of this match. So instead, we're having to think now, right, we've got to play off of the port side if we want to get the torpedo tubes into play, and it looks as though the enemy team is actually starting to take the bait, in that we're opening up a gap into these central land masses, and with Ben and I reversing away from the engagement from earlier, i.e. that northeastern engagement, this is causing the enemy team with more ships than what Ben and I can afford, i.e. 2 versus what looks to be 4 at least right now. It's encouraging them to come on in full strength, simply because they've got the numerical advantage. What we're going to see is, by drawing closer and closer, the secondaries now start to open up, and the engagement turns in the favour of the 2 German battleships, with the Kutsov now being too close to be able to use their speed or ability to accelerate or decelerate to dodge the shells from our 380mm artillery pieces, as we're about to show. Now it wasn't a great salvo there, they were angled, but we picked up 1 penetrating hit, and you can see how the Kutsov now has to very quickly react to incoming fire. They don't have that luxury anymore of thinking to themselves they're really far away and they can just dodge the shells at their own leisurely pace by comparison. And now Ben and I will go on the aggressive stance, with me leading the way using the 6km torpedo tubes as a threat to get close enough to enemy ships, particularly the enemy Bismarck, and do serious damage up close. Because remember, we have got our artillery pieces, but the torpedoes can do just as much damage in equal measure. And with that 90-second reload, another set of torpedo tubes is not too far away. It's just a pity we lost that starboard set, as the Hussein is spotted very briefly making their way round to our starboard side. And this is why I've told Ben to turn on his Hydroacoustic Search to counter that incoming threat, and I get the feeling the next set of torpedoes will be coming across this open water gap ahead off to our starboard aft side. Sorry, starboard bow side I should say. So I'm cutting my speed here with the Kutsov now in open water and lost a lot of health because of the closure of the engagement distance. They're still tossing in high explosive salvo after high explosive salvo, but their life's pretty much done for. And there's a set of torpedoes from the Kutsov, the 8km torpedoes we mentioned earlier, and here come deep water torpedoes as mentioned earlier from the Hussein coming across the open water gap, and Ben's Hydro confirms their presence and means we've got ample time to react to them as we're about to get off another hill, keeping our health topped up. And now the enemy Bismarck comes a little bit too far round the corner for their own liking, we can get our torpedo tubes off. We are exposed on our broadside here, but they aim too far forward on our ship, not giving the appropriate lead, meaning that we take very little damage, and in return we deal approximately 40,000 damage with our torpedoes and get the Bismarck down to 357 health. If only we could have fished them off there with our guns, instead aiming into the angled side armour. That was a mistake on my part, and our secondaries are not quite getting the job done at the moment by the looks of things, as our Helena takes the Bismarck out. Quite hoping the secondaries would finish the job there. But now, having reversed the engagement and gone on the counter attack, we can now get a little bit closer to the buoys, which is located behind the landmass ahead of us. Now the difficulty here is the fact we're going to see how, remember earlier we mentioned we didn't want to push into the landmasses because of lack of manoeuvrability of the battleship. Well, this is coming back to reflection. But importantly, we positioned ourselves in such a manner to have a landmass between us on our starboard side and the Hussein. And what Ben can now do, because he has the Hydroacoustic Search, he can afford to go hunt the Hussein within their own smokescreen. And the fact that I'm being shot at by that enemy destroyer right now tells me one thing, which is I need to go in reverse in order to be able to dodge incoming torpedoes or just not go forward, because the Hussein having to shoot past a landmass or around the side of a landmass to be able to hit me with their guns, their torpedo tubes are going to have a terrible aiming arc on my ship. So instead I start to reverse to take away the ability for them to throw torpedoes at me, and Ben starts to make his way forward, being the aggressor now because he has the Hydroacoustic Search, to go hunt that destroyer, and in return, as the boys comes around the corner, I can take out their lead turret. Perhaps I fired a little bit too soon. If I'd fired a bit later, could have picked up a citadel or more penetrating hits, but the secondaries finished the job, and that's another kill. Third kill of the game for myself. And Ben can now go hunt down the enemy destroyer with the support of our own Hussein in order to make sure it's not going to be a threat anymore. And in return, as I continue to reverse away, I can look towards the enemy Miyoko up in the north and try to get them out of the game. And hopefully now we can see how the measured aggression has come into effect, and how by closing the distance on the enemy ships we've been able to bring the secondaries into play, we've been able to bring the main artillery pieces into play, and whilst we won't be using our torpedo tubes any longer, we were able to use them in a rather important circumstance to bring down an enemy battleship that could have been rather lethal to us, but we got it right. Find at the Miyoko, not expecting to pick up the kill, although we're trying to provide the right amount of lead. We picked up 2 over penetrations there. The enemy Hussein falls to our Hussein, Ben assists in that regard, and now our game is pretty much wrapped up, as we just need to finish off the enemy Amagi up in the northern sector of the map, and the Miyoko is starting to turn away from our gallant's last position. It may be the case they can't see them, and they're instead trying to retreat back to their friendly Amagi. And as they go through their turn, we're not going to open fire just yet, but Ben and I have both got the same idea of bringing down this Japanese cruiser as they finish their turn, and we'll see who gets the kill. 4th kill to the Tirpitz. Sorry about that, Ben. And now we're just going to give each other a little nudge to celebrate. But that pretty much wraps up the game as we look over towards the Amagi over on that northern side of the map. And we may try to get a finishing salvo off on them, but it depends if they give broadside. And also having to get used to the fact that the dispersion of the guns, as mentioned time and time again over the course of this gameplay, isn't that great as you go to longer distances. Albeit if you do citadel a target for 11,600 damage per armor piercing shell, it can prove to be rather devastating, particularly against, pardon me, those lightly armoured cruisers that you're going to see, such as the Mogami at Tier 8. But that's the game, time for the post-game stats. So in what was a rather enjoyable match in the end, we can see that as part of our victory, our battle performance amounted to a damage output of 98,270 HP, and along the way we picked up 3 achievements. Firstly, Fireproof. for receiving damage caused by fire that exceeds 40% of our ship's normal health pool and survive the battle. Secondly, Close Quarters Expert, for damaging and destroying an enemy ship, where the final direct damage must be caused by secondary battery guns. And finally, the Dreadnought, for receiving damage exceeding 120% of our ship's normal health pool from 4 or more enemy ships and survive the battle. Coming on to team scores, we can see that we topped our team in terms of base experience earned, and Ben came third. And the overall role that our division had to play over the course of this game was all focused down the eastern side of the map and the contest for the group of landmasses on that side. Whereby at first we recognised the fact that we couldn't charge into those landmasses through the threat of a potential destroyer crossfire, both the Farragut and the Hsien-Yang, and also the position of the enemy's cruisers north of landmasses and being able to rain down continuous fire. So instead, we decided to make our way right out to the eastern edge and then turn into those land masses and see how the situation developed, giving us the ability to eliminate the Farragut, catching them as they're trying to leave their smokescreen, and then we went into a retreating stance, giving the enemy ships positioned north of land masses the impression that they could start to hunt down the 2 German battleships that were in retreat. But really that led them on for us to go into a counter-attack, and having closed the distance thanks to landmasses and the aggression of our opponents, we could then be the aggressors and use the landmasses to our advantage in closing the engagement distance and putting the enemy ships into positions where they weren't in ideal firing positions or positions to get away, meaning that we could go toe-to-toe, in the case of the Tirpitz using our guns, our secondaries and our torpedoes in order to wreak havoc, and in the case of Ben's Bismarck, adding in that ability to use Hydroacoustic Search instead of torpedoes to see the torpedoes well before they arrive and even spot the Hsien-Yang out of their own smokescreen. And that led to the victory on our side of the map and helped our team towards overall victory. In coming on to our detailed report, we have 2 key items to note here, the first being the damage we received of 85,965. Whilst this enabled us to pick up the Dreadnought achievement, that's not as important as the fact that you need to monitor your aggression when sailing this ship, I feel. Whereby if you decide to charge blindly into the enemy team, whether at the start of the game or certainly as the game progresses, you need to know when not to overextend, and that way you can use your heal to offset the damage you pick up. And this game we did a very good job, I feel, of offsetting the fire damage that the enemy Kutsov in particular managed to score on us, hence the fireproof award coming in as part of our Dreadnought, and the fact that we still had ample health remaining as the game went into its final stages. And by being able to absorb that damage over time, i.e. tanking damage for the team on your ship, it means that the enemy team will become frustrated in that you're the battleship that cannot be sunk, and therefore this gives you more options as the game progresses, and you can continue to go through cycles of aggression and then pulling back to heal up before going in once again. Something that I think I have to get used to managing this ship, particularly in Tier 9 and Tier 10 games. The other item is with regards to damage modules, the fact that we lost one of our torpedo tubes rather rapidly. And this is going to encourage me to pick up the preventative maintenance captain skill at Tier 1 later on as I go towards a 19-point captain, because without the torpedo tubes, one could argue, at a high level of ignorance, as I would personally argue right now, that with no torpedo tubes, this ship, i.e. the Tirpitz, is effectively a Bismarck without the Hydroacoustic Search consumable, but we'll see as time goes on and I produce a formal review of the ship. As for credits and experience, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked away with 360,613 silver credits and 4,980 commander experience. To conclude, if I had to summarise my first impressions of the Tirpitz in a single phrase, that would be, she is a ship about planned aggression. She cannot afford to charge in towards the enemy fleet with reckless abandon, simply because she doesn't have the tools to counter what counters lie ahead, or the potential ambush threats, such as torpedoes from any destroyers or cruisers, or those ships awaiting around a corner. Whereas the Bismarck, by comparison, as we saw to an extent in today's gameplay, has the Hydroacoustic Search consumable that gives her that intelligence and the ability, therefore, to go charging in knowing what's to come. So instead, you have to think about when's the ideal time to push, when's the ideal time to strike, and over today's gameplay we saw it came when we lured the enemy team in towards the land masses on the eastern side of the map, and then we turned around to go charging towards them, bringing our torpedoes into play against the enemy's Bismarck, and in return causing irreparable damage to the enemy fleet, which enabled us to bring down the eastern side in our team's favour. But if we'd not thought about it from the outset, it could have been a very different outcome, simply because one can get carried away in this ship, I expect. I'm sure I'm going to make that mistake a number of times as I go through my experience of sailing her. But with that, I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. And as always, if you're looking to get into the game today, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to use the link in the description of this video, as you can sign up for free, and it's all the merrier in the high seas of World of Warships. But until next time, as always, take care and fair seas.